Hello and welcome to the Tank Basics series. This is episode 4 and today I'm going to tell you why you should be using an ice staff on your back bar. So as a tank, the ice staff is an extremely good weapon and there are a number of reasons why that is. Now, the main reason is because it is essentially a tank weapon. It has been designed to be used by a tank as a defensive weapon, similar to the one-hand and shield. Now, when you consider the one-hand and shield, if we actually look at the one-hand and shield skill line, the amount of times that you will use these skills is very minimal. So, Pierce Armor is really the main skill that you need from the one-hand and shield skill line to taunt and to cause the major and minor breach. Heroic Slash is a flex skill that you don't need to use. Defensive Stance is a skill that you rarely need to use. You could use it for the increased block mitigation, but you'd actually be better off slotting a different skill. Revealing Flare and the Major Protection would actually be more beneficial to slot, and you can slot that on an Ice Staff bar or the One-Hand and Shield bar. The only time I really use Defensive Stance is in Sunspire against the Locustes boss, and that is to reflect back the damage at the boss. There are certain fights in the game where if you reflect damage at bosses, they will heal, or it will cause additional mechanics. So it's generally not a good idea. Shield Charge is used in literally one place in the game. I use it in Halls of Fabrications, and that is it. So it's not useful. And Power Slam is only used to proc the Vatashran one-hand and shield, which is for stacking enemies. Now the passives, again, reduce the cost of 100 shield abilities, reduce the cost of blocking, increase weapon and spell damage. Not really that useful. And the amount of damage you can block by 20%, okay. So increase block mitigation. Improves the standard bash attack, causing more damage. Increase the amount of damage you can block from projectiles and range attacks by 14%. And reduces the movement speed penalty of bracing. So, some nice passives in there, but you definitely don't need to have those on 2 bars. You just need them on 1 bar. If we go over to the Destruction Staff now, so the ultimate, obviously not really that useful for a tank, but pretty much every single skill is needed for tanking in the Destruction Staff skill line. So if you're not using a Destruction Staff, if you're not using an Ice Staff, you are seriously diminishing your usefulness as a tank, your ability as a tank, the effectiveness that you're able to tank. So Crushing Shock is going to be used for ranged interrupting enemies. And this is something that you will quite often need. And it's quite useful in a number of situations for getting interrupts and ranged interrupts and things like that. Elemental Blockade, one of the most important skills in the game for tanks. This will be placed on the ground and it will basically proc your weapon enchant on cooldown. As long as it's on the ground, your weapon enchant, which is usually an infused crusher, because two-handed weapons have bigger enchants than one-handed weapons, and it's going to proc that on cooldown by having this on the ground. This is also a great spammable skill because it gives a huge projectile shield. So when you put this down on the ground, every time you cast it, it's going to give you and group members a damage shield, which will defend against projectiles. There are certain places in this game where it's great to spam it. Whenever there's projectiles on you can just keep casting it and casting it and casting it, and it will defend against those particular things. It can also be used to immobilize enemies that are chilled. So if you've got a chilled enemy, you can then immobilize them with Blockade. This is actually my preferred method of crowd control. You've then got Destructive Clench, which is a fantastic tank skill now. Frost Clench costs less. It's an extremely cheap skill. And it also applies Major Maim, which reduces enemies' damage by 10%. It immobilizes enemies, and it taunts enemies, and it causes the chilled effect. It's a guaranteed chilled effect, which means it's guaranteed minor brittle, but it's also guaranteed Major Maim. It's a taunt. It does literally all those things in one little skill. So an amazing skill for maintaining minor brittle, taunt, the chilled effect, and Major Maim to reduce the boss's damage. This means that you don't need to use certain monster sets like Lady Thorn because you can obtain Major Maim with one skill rather than a monster set with a cooldown. You've then got weakness to elements, and either morph here can be useful in different situations, but like this can be useful for any time that you are range tanking or need to debuff multiple enemies. So the Cloud Rest portals, VSS when you're range tanking, different things like that. It can be a useful skill. And then finally we've got Pulsar, which is a fantastic skill. Again, it's area of effect, and it will do area of effect minor mangle, reducing max health of enemies by 10%. So great for any kind of ad pull. It also gives your group minor protection. Because you're using the Pulsar morph, it's got an increased chance to apply status effects, which means an increased chance at the chilled effect, which means AoE minor brittle. If you combine Pulsar with blockade, because you are chilling the enemies with Pulsar, you then cast blockade, and that's a guaranteed immobilization. So you get so many things by doing Pulsar and blockade. It's got so many benefits to doing it. So another fantastic skill. So basically there's more skills in the Destruction Staff skill line that are useful than actually in the One Hand and Shield skill line. Then you look at the passives. Tri-Focus is an optional thing. So you block with Magicka instead of Stamina when holding an Ice Staff. That is an optional thing that you can use if you want to. Penetrating Magic, not something you need. It reduces the resistance that your spells hit the enemy. Not useful. But then when we start getting onto this, Elemental Force increases your chance to apply status effects by 100%. This is useful because this means increased chilled, increased minor brittle. Ancient Knowledge, again another one. Equipping an Ice Staff reduces the cost of blocking by 36% and the amount of damage you can block by 20%. So this basically is what turns this into a tank weapon, because it reduces block cost and increases block mitigation. And then Destruction Expert. When you kill an enemy with a Destruction Staff, you restore Magicka, so not really that vital, but when you absorb damage using a Destruction Staff damage shield, so when you cast Blockade, you get that ice damage shield, you get Magicka back from that. So quite a few good passives as well. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly show you against a hard-hitting boss here, what sort of damage difference looks like between the Ice Staff and the Sword and Board. This boss hits really hard. It's like a really high-hitting boss damage-wise, but it's not going to do too much to us. So here we go. 17,669 with a one-hand and shield. 17,669. If we then go on the Ice Staff, 18,348. So in reality, the difference is extremely small. So it's safe. It's safe to block damage with an Ice Staff. It really is. Like it's not a lot of difference. They're very, very similar in terms of the amount of damage that can be blocked. And so this makes it a great option for a tank weapon. So there you go, guys. As you've seen, the Ice Staff is a very good tank weapon. It's got so much utility. If you're not using one, you're making life more difficult for yourself because you're not able to offer the same skills and utility and benefits that you can just by using a one-hand and shield. The Ice Staff is vital. In general, you do want to be using that Infused Crusher, so reduces the target's physical and spell resistance, and you want that with an infused weapon. So every time you keep your blockade down, when the enemy is still inside this blockade, it's going to keep that enchant active. And it's going to automatically keep ticking while this is on the ground. And then what you need to do is just recast it on cooldown, and as you recast it on cooldown, it's just going to maintain that Infused Crusher, which is absolutely vital for your group's damage, and using a Frost Staff, like I say, is vital for you as a tank. So I hope this video has helped you understand a bit more about tanking with a Frost Staff. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye for now.